back, everyone, to another episode of Kingdom of Dreams podcast, The Making of Stories. Once again, I've got Stephen Rosenbaum, this time for James Cameron's Avatar. He was a VFX artist on that amazing breakthrough technology film. I've had him already four times. Well, technically, it was twice, and that was broken into four episodes: Jurassic Park, The Abyss, Terminator 2, and Forrest Gump, and now the Avatar. Not the Avatar, Avatar. Again, I just love listening to details and behind the scenes stories of any film, especially from the VFX standpoint. Steven really brings some cool stories to the table, and I just love listening to him and sharing all this knowledge and wonderful behind the scenes stories. Without further ado, here's my conversation with VFX artist Stephen Rosenbaum for James Cameron's Avatar. Welcome back, man. Appreciate it again to talk about James Cameron's Avatar. I mean, it's just one of those films that I remember when it came out. It's the only film that I've ever seen with 3D glasses. I have never seen anything after that with 3D glasses. And to see a James Cameron film after 12 years of Titanic and to see it in such a totally different experience, like, motion capture technology was kind of there, but he just took it to another level and introduced the world to something brand new. Just your experience from learning about the project, even though you had worked with James before initially, and kind of your journey through it. Would love to start with whatever you want to start with. That would
Yeah,
that's
I
what I
mean,
would love to hear.
it's you know that movie Avatar was, I think, a paradigm shift in our industry. It was really, all the stuff we had done up to that point. There was a lot of cool movies coming out, Jurassic, and of course Gump, what we did, and you know, the advent of mocap, and what we could do with capturing actors' performances and translating them onto characters or even creatures and so forth. But it was really Jim who came in with this idea that where his principal mandate was, why do I have to wait to post to direct my actors' performances? That was sort of the fundamental question he was asking was, we have traditional prep, and then we shoot the movie, and you might have an actor playing a character that is embellished with computer graphics, or maybe is an entirely CG character that you don't see in post, 6 months down into the post-production schedule, because you've got to build it and you've got to do all your testing and so forth. Why can't he just shoot his movie and direct his characters in real time, like he does a live action shot set, or live action shoot? And so, um, we had developed all these technologies. Is really There's disparate technologies that we started to look at and go, well, we could use mocap for this. We could use facial cap, but we have some limitations, and we'll talk about that. And we have the ability to do. We have these super fast computers now that we can do real-time solving on positional information, and we could you know probably put these things together. And on top of that, what happens when we get into a live action set and we want those characters to be embedded within this live action set? How do we do that? And so we developed a concept called simulcam, which was really, a variant of motion capturing a live action camera and doing a video mix, real time stream mix, which we had done in the past, but nobody had really thought about how to like combine all these, like I say, these disparate technologies, and to try and achieve Jim's goal. So that was the premise, and I think through probably about a year's worth of development, um, we put it together. It was largely led by a guy named Glenn Derry, who was really kind of the primary architect in a lot of the motion capture technologies that we used. Ultimately, we called it performance capture, which was essentially what it sounds like, which is capturing an actor's performance. Jim directing not just the actor, but also the character. The actors can see the characters. Excuse me. The actors can see their own characters that they're playing and become them, which was sort of a key point that I think even to this day, you ask most SAG actors that, they're afraid of this technology, but you look at like the Andy Circuses out there, and that they completely get it. They embrace it. They understand that character, that creature that I'm playing is actually my performance. And it's my performance because I can see it in real time. I can understand um, how to make that character perform the way I want it to do, not wait, as I said, 6 months into post for an army of, 50 animators to interpret what the actor wanted. So anyway,
Interesting. That I've never thought of that way, but go on.
yeah. So I mean, I would say if you want, I can talk about, the beginnings of the process, which were um, building a motion capture stage. At that point, we were able to do what we called real-time body capture. So you're putting, everybody's seen, actors in these spandex suits and they put these reflective markers on it. Um, there are different types of motion capture, but we used what was called optical sensing. Basically, they're little reflective, like the same reflective material you get on the back of your tennis shoe or whatever. Um, and there's an array of cameras out there that are looking at these markers and they're triangulating on each marker on an actor's suit. And in real time, they're doing a super fast calculation, what we call a solve, of that position in space. So if I have a marker on my shoulder and there's two or three cameras that can see the marker on my shoulder, at any given moment, it knows spatially where I am in this room. So then you expand that out to a whole cluster of these markers across the body, and the compute power was such that we could do it super fast calculations, these solves, um, to the point where we were in real time at sub-millimeter precision. So it was incredibly accurate. So that was where we were at the beginning of the show. It was we were kind of just achieving that that level of technology. And but what we hadn't done is the ability to capture the face well. Up to that point, the only kind of facial capture we could do was you may have seen, we put tiny little markers on the face.
Yeah.
And they were glued on, sometimes upwards of like 300 little tiny little markers. And you had have the actor hold relatively still, usually sitting in a chair or standing, and they couldn't really move around this room. They were in a small little box essentially, and the cameras were all pointing, dozens of cameras, and they were capturing the facial movement. But even that was not that accurate. It was not really it was not only was it not flexible, but it wasn't it didn't have the robust um, data production that we needed. It really was it could give you sort of squishy facial performance. And what we were looking for was very tight, articulate facial expressions. So again, it was, I think, Glenn Derry who came up with the idea, well, why do we restrict? This was a mandate again from Jim. He wants his actor to be able to move around to entire space freely and not have to be in the confines. And why can't we capture the facial performance as well as the body performance together? So he created you may have seen these. It's just basically like a bike helmet with a
Yeah.
little camera that sticks off the side and it points straight at their face.
Yeah.
On Avatar, we had a single camera. Um, Subsequent shows, we've done multiple cameras, and there's still ongoing debate about what the best configuration is. Is it two here, one here? Maybe there's two on top of each other here. What captures the face the best? Um, the nice thing about the frontal camera was, and we can talk about this later, but and I think it's missing in a lot of CG generated facial performances, is that it this will allow you to see what's going on with the tongue. And when you're here, you don't really see what's going on with the tongue. And when you see facial performances, and you're looking at it going, why is it just not quite right? It's usually that you're lacking tongue articulation. So you're not, I mean, you might see, my tongue very subtly, but what it does is it pushes my lips and my cheeks into a certain position
Right.
with every phoneme, every word. Um, and so that camera looking straight in was allowing me to see, how the tongue was banging against the teeth and the lips and so forth. So that really helped in terms of like the amount of data that we were acquiring. Um, so from that, we got very scientific. We started studying, you know, the people who had published out there, scientists that had published in various medical journals, and we came across a psychologist um, named Paul Ekman who sort of wrote a lot of books on the study of facial expression, specifically microexpression, and the subtleties that go on with that. And he had essentially codified human expression. He had broken it down into the humans into 7 universal human expressions. So, fear, surprise, anger, disgust, um, sadness, contempt, and I'm blanking on the other one. But
Anxiety.
anyway, actually, anxiety is not an expression; it's a
I know,
feeling.
I know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but that's actually what we were trying to determine, what are the expressions? Because ultimately, what we're trying to do is capture the persona of the individual through those expressions. So anyway, we we then started mapping the understanding the anatomy of the human face, and you've got your zygomatic major, your zygomatic minor, you've got your eyebrows, your corrugators, and so forth. You've got basically, if I recall, 11 muscles in the face that are or primary muscles that are in the face that are making pulling and pushing to make expressions, so we started to map the markers that we were putting on the face, and we decided to do it as makeup dots, essentially these little green makeup dots, and we would mark them down the lines of the muscle. So as I smiled, we could see how the dots moved from a neutral pose to an expression. We With those dots, as they moved around on the face, we could essentially record from the video camera that was placed in front of them how they moved, and then effectively do a solve of that human face, of the human expressions, and map that onto a character. So we would start by doing a a series of exercises with each actor and put them through essentially the extremes of their how they move their face. So, the simple way of saying it is like, I smile differently than you, the way you smile, and you have certain facial tics than I might have certain facial tics, and um, how much do I blink? How much do I move my head, and so forth. So we were essentially capturing a library of that individual persona. And then from the actual performance that we would capture of them, we could then translate that, essentially a map of that, onto their CG character. So their Navi or their avatar in this case. So when we were first capping, we were not able to just to be clear, we were not able to do a real-time solve of the face. We were doing a real-time solve of the body. So we were capturing video of the face concurrent to the body capture. So you could have, an avatar, a Navi moving around the mocap studio, mocap stage, and they could be interacting with each other, and you'd see them on a monitor, their CG equivalent, and the actors could also see that. So they'd be moving around doing, all their performances, but their face would be static. Eventually, as we got better at figuring out how to solve the face, we would started to do some real-time facial solves. So um, we did that to a more limited extent, though, on the show. But it was enough where, if anybody's familiar with the process of shooting, a live action movie, you set up for a scene, and the actors, have their dialogue and they perform, and then they cut the camera, and then they go over to a monitor and they review their take with the director, or the director comes out and says, okay, that was really good, but I want you to adjust here. They could just like that, but they could see not only their performance as a human, but they could see their character performance as well. So they could go, okay. So like Zoe Saldana, she was great because she could see, it's much, I sort of equate it with the idea of like when an actor puts on a costume or makeup, hair, or when a musician goes out on stage, there's a certain energizing that happens when you go out and you're putting on this character. Essentially, you're literally physically wearing this character. They have a better understanding and they can perform to that character. So like I was starting to say with Zoe, it was very early on she realized, oh, I've got these big canine teeth and I should use those. And so you could see her growl. She wouldn't initially realize it, but when sees herself perform, she's like, I'm a little beastly with this. I can go, I understand my character and I understand, you know my beauty, my sophistication, my intellect, and you just get that from the way they carry that physically carry themselves. And again, to contrast against what had previously been done to this point was you you know the actors just performing in a black box with this mocap suit and hoping for the best that a year from now, like I say, an army of animators understands what the intended performance was supposed to be. And usually it's not, and usually it's flat, and not, the actors, rightly were unhappy with those, ultimate performances that were essentially watered down by like an army of animators. Now they had actual control over it. So anyway, so that was sort of the general premise. And then, from that point forward, once we had technically accomplished that, we were away. We were, scheduling it just like a normal shoot. It had
Right.
its, the daily the sequences that we had to get every single day. Um, the big thing was, taking every, traditional departments and essentially creating the digital equivalent of them. So instead of an art department, we had a virtual art department. So we called it a VAD. And we had also part of the art department, we had a, construction crew. So they were in charge of building, the environments and, the props and so forth, terrain, etc. And then constructing all that, putting it all together. We had a team who would set up the initial lighting and so forth. And then, we'd get to, much like a live action shoot, we'd pull open, a file that had an environment, a scene that we wanted to shoot within. We'd position our actors in that space. And then Jim would pick up what we called a virtual camera. And this allowed him to essentially, it was like just like a finder or any looking through a motion picture
Yeah.
camera. You could see the world, you could move around it. So it was, if you would imagine, it was just a little monitor, but it had little joystick controls on little handles on each side, which had joystick controls. So and they had little mocap markers on it. So it was being tracked much like a body was being tracked from in motion capture. So as he moved to the right, the whole camera point of view in that virtual world would move to the right. So you could get much more sophisticated. You could walk with it, become like a steady cam. You could say, you know what, I want to scale my camera so that I'm now a crane. So if I raise it up for every let's say foot that I raise it up, make that 10 feet. So I could, start doing this really high boom up just by raising my arms. So if I go, 3 feet high, that's the equivalent of booming up 30 feet. So it opened up a whole world for him to be able to shoot his movie in a virtual space. So he could see he'd look over and see them on the mocap stage, and he'd be standing there next to him. But he'd look on him on his virtual camera, and he'd see the characters that the actors were playing, and he could, stage the scene. Say, okay, you stand over here, you stand over here. We're going to do this, and here's the space, and we've got these, props, essentially proxy props that they might interact with. They were just little mocap pieces of things, let's say like a bow and arrow or whatever. And we'd have the virtual equivalent. So if Neytiri picked up a bow and arrow and pulled the arrow back, we could see, or sorry, if Zoe picked up a prop bow and arrow, we could say Neytiri doing the same thing in real time. So Jim could then walk over with his virtual camera and frame that shot, so he could get just the exact same way he would shoot a live action movie. So once we got that, we staged the action, then it's just, you know, lines on a script at that point. It's reading the action or reading the dialogue. Jim, of course, is is totally brilliant at choreographing action. I often, I used it sort of to challenge myself as like how much do I know compared to him? And I would think about in advance, like how would I stage this? And then he'd come in and like do 10 times better job, of course, because that's who he is. But he he would, once we figured that out, we would block the scene with the virtual camera, and then we go, okay, let's do some takes, and we'd start knocking off the takes, and because we didn't have the physical limitations of a set, meaning, weather, um, lighting changes were much faster, um, you know, just the nature of the slowness of a typical live action shoot. We were producing scenes in about a quarter of the time that it would take to do if it were live action. Um, so we really moved through a lot, and Jim capitalized on that and basically was able to shoot, of course, a lot more than he really needed, but it gave him options.
Yeah.
The other really beautiful variable involved in this process was that all that data, the visual data, the video that was being recorded from the virtual camera, was being streamed straight into an Avid right on the off side of the
Oh my
set.
God, are you serious? That's so cool.
Yes. We had an editor sitting there, and Jim would pop off a take on, you're saying, let's shoot Neytiri, framing her, and it would stream right into the Avid, and they could just start assembling their movie as they went along. So the entire scene, so he could see that scene being constructed and realize at that moment what he needed, what he didn't need, what he liked, what he didn't like. And then like I say, because it was so fast, it could give him options. He's like, I like this angle, but I also like this angle. Let's shoot some variants of both, and bring them into the oven, and I'll decide later. We'll see which one works ultimately in the cut. So it gave him a lot of flexibility, and the actors loved it. I would say the one limitation that we haven't cracked well. I was talking about how actors can put on, hair or makeup or a costume, and they become that character.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same for lighting. When an actor stands on a set and they can feel the light, whatever it is, if they're interior or exterior, they understand where the lighting is, they understand how to work the lighting in that environment. Um, and they perform to it. They really do. And because we're on a mocap stage, it's really just house lights. It's sterile. We would, dim it a bit, but you didn't have any kind of directional light sources. You didn't have any kind of ambient light sources. So they couldn't really, other than looking at the monitor, and after between the takes, they could understand at that point, okay, the sun's back here. I understand it's coming here and it's rimming my head. So if I move in a certain way, I can get a really nice edge lighting here and catch my eye and so forth. The actors do think about that. And so we just physically couldn't emulate that. It was, then it becomes, much more like a live action shoot. So there are some negatives to it. There's a
Yeah,
lot
yeah,
more negatives to it, of course, in the process, but there are plenty of positives for the right instance.
yeah. I think for me, a couple of points. So, Andy Serkis, obviously, I think the motion capture technology, if I'm not mistaken, kind of got initiated in Lord of the Rings, the second one, the Two Towers, right? Is it called? I
Yeah.
think. And then, how he sort of became the primary person to do King Kong and then Adventures of Tintin and all that. And then to see that transform into such a grand scale level with Avatar. You talked about Zoe. I think for me, her character, and you were talking about her expression, then I remember how she says, you should not be here. right? Like
Yeah.
there's that line, and her expressions, I feel, nothing to take away from anybody else, any other actor, were probably in the first film the most powerful ones. Like she was really into the character, and she probably was very aware of the fact of the how the expressions are going to be transformed into that motion
Yeah.
capture technology.
Yeah.
Um, do you
She should
think?
she should have been nominated, honestly. I mean, it's again, sorry to interrupt, but it's like
Yeah, it's fine.
this is the thing is like the actors are so afraid. It's they're just so like, oh, this is a digital character. We can't offer any accolades for that. And it was Zoe's performance, to your point. It was 100% her. She delivered that performance on a character, that happened to be digital makeup instead of real makeup. Anyway,
Yeah.
sorry, go
No, 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 it's fine. Well, she did win the Oscar 2 weeks ago, just to
on. She
make up
did.
for that.
Well deserved
For
on that one.
I mean, she is a very talented actress and very incredible human being from what I've read. But going back to what I was saying with the technology, how Avatar. So the world of Avatar, right? Like when you first see it, okay, the first time I saw it, it was like, whoa, right? Like it looked amazing. But
Mm.
again, going back to what you and I have sort of talked about in the past, the story, despite being very simple, simple story, but just it was just done so well that you get immersed so much into the characters and the story. And even to this day, like when I saw The Way of the Water, 2, 3 years ago, it's just again the characters and the story, and you completely forget about the motion capture. And without not naming any films, but there are motion capture films where you do realize, okay, this is motion capture, right?
Yeah.
With Avatar, it's not the case, and few other exceptions. But yeah, hats off to again James and yourself and your team. Is that how you guys articulated the VFX in such a way where it served the story first before anything else?
Yeah, we were thrilled to do it. I mean, it was an opportunity for us to really leverage technologies that we knew were capable, they were out there, um, and use it the right way. Use it the way it was complementing an actor's ability to deliver a performance. It didn't become the technology did not become the performance, that
Hmm.
the actor was the performance. And we had to that was a mandate, certainly, a personal mandate that we all shared, but Jim was driving that home continually. Like, don't mess with the actor's performance. Just, this needs to be 100% true to the performances. The reason I think a lot of mocap performances stray or fail is because they stray off of that performance, because it is data that can be manipulated in post. And I think that's where actors are freaked out about.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
oh, you're gonna change me. You're gonna do something that's not what I would do. And it is true. We can do that, but certainly on this show, and we were 100% behind it. Like, why mess with that? Don't let the technology drive that. It should be 100% the creative process.
right. So at that time, I mean, now, with the second that came out 3 years ago, I don't even remember, maybe 2 years ago, and then the third one comes out this December. So the process for these kind of films is very long, right? Like from scripting to pre-production to production to post. I think nowadays it's probably, from what I remember, probably good 4 to 5, 6 years, combination of two films, maybe even a bit longer. But back then, it came out in 2009. How long was because it was a first of its kind, from the time that you're on the film or just the pre-production until it's done, what's the timeline like?
I was on for 3 years. There was a year of tech development beforehand, before they actually started to do proper production work. So, Glenn mentioned Glenn Derry. He was developing these technologies and trying to figure out how to make it work. So there was just a small team in 2006. And then I came on in January of 2007, and it came out in December of 2009. So, um, So it was, you know, I think that's, the qualifications are in terms of time was it was new technologies that, we certainly had some stumbling blocks that we had to get around and or figure out how to resolve. Um, but also, Jim, he had total control in a much less costly environment. If you're doing live action, you have a mandate to get through your certain number of days, certain number of setups every single day, and you have only X number of days to get through the shoot, and anything over is going to be, hell to pay. This was a much, because it was on a mocap stage, a much less expensive uh, situation, smaller team.
Mm.
So it afforded him the ability to literally to play a bit, and that really, I think, they contributed to the schedule going a little long, but to the benefit of the show, I think, ultimately. And I think most people agree with that, although they don't see, I mean, I have recollections of the movie initially being like 3.5 hours long. Um, and it was really not until month month to 3 months before we released it, December of 2009, where he finally brought it under the 3 hour mark. There was a lot of like, it can't be 3 hour, 3+ hours. So he had to make hard decisions he had a lot of material that he had to cut. And but I think it's, again, to have that wealth of options and to be able to
Yeah,
is really, I think, a director's dream, and certainly does help the filmmaking process. You can't just
sure.
never shoot just exactly what's in the script. You kind of have to give yourself some options, because ultimately you get into editorial and you're like, I can't make this scene work, and I need to do some pickups, and you end up going back and reshooting stuff at great expense.
No, 100%. It's it's incredible how um, even, when you write a script and you rewrite it and you rewrite it and you rewrite it, and then when you see a location, you're like, oh, okay. So let me redo, not necessarily the essence of the script, but just tweaking things here and there just to, because it changes stuff. It changes stuff completely. But in this case, everything is like a stage, right? Like you're working on a sound stage, but yeah, you're getting all the real life feed, but still to be able to have that vision and to make it last that long. And you said it was longer. Do you remember anything specific that was cut out that you enjoyed working on, or was that something that you can't talk about because of
I
NDA?
can't talk about it. There were two scenes in particular. I was like, oh, would love, maybe one day there'll be a director's cut that it'll come out. But you know, it, it's part of the filmmaking process, right?
Yeah, I know.
Sometimes you
I
have to
get
make
it.
some
I
really
get
hard decisions, and you kind of like, oh, does it service the movie, or at some point, or I think to keep in mind this the concept of behind this movie was so abstract, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it was like we weren't sure if people were going to respond to it. Honestly, there was a lot of nervousness, but
I mean,
um,
look at that. It made over $1 billion.
it made, I think, close to 3 billion,
Three
three.
billion, 3 billion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's close to that. Probably over that now. The Just coming back for a second, just because you touched on
Sure.
Rings and Tintin and all that. So Andy Serkis didn't have the benefit of the real time. He had some real time in body, but the facial capture was pretty primitive in those days. It was really on Avatar that we sort of really established
Sure.
this as a fluid pipeline, a fluid workflow, and Steven Spielberg picked up on it, and that sort of, I think, motivated him to, and Peter Jackson, because we were doing Avatar with Weta, um, to do Tintin. So that they actually, like, halfway through our shoot, they were in the warehouse down the street in Los Angeles starting to do Tintin, and Steven was eating it up. I mean, he was like this. He just completely embraced it. I've seen a lot of directors, really take it in and just see it as an extension of a new tool, new technologies that allow them to do what they were very familiar with, basically make it easier to use their skills. Much like you hear, the comments about Gen AI now. Oh, it's
Mm,
voodoo, and you know
yeah,
what? If
yeah.
it's actually just a powerful tool set to what we do every day. But he shot Tintin using pretty much the same technologies we had developed on Avatar while we were still shooting Avatar. And in fact, I think I think he finished before we
Before you guys.
finished. So he started later and finished before us. He was, typical Stephen, very efficient filmmaker, um, and got through the process, you know, basically using the same technologies.
Yeah. Which it came 2 years after though, I think 2 or 3 years after Avatar, if my memory serves me right. But going back to Avatar, the whole story of the weak versus the mighty powerful, I mean it's been done so many times, but again, there's just something about it that the underdog story speaks to people, but especially in this visual format. Um, for me, and I think for a lot of people, and I read about this actually before I go on, just to talk about the duration, I was just reading James Cameron's interview a few days ago. Was it yesterday? That the next film, Fire and Ash, or Ash and Fire, I think it's called, one or the other. It's much longer than the last film, so it's probably
Mm,
over 3.5 hours long.
mm.
But going back to Avatar original one, the sequence, and pardon my no, knowledge base on the terminology of the species and the characters in the film. The sequence where they jump on these birds, right? The
Yeah,
gigantic
the
birds,
Banshees. Yeah,
the Banshees. I remember reading James Cameron's interview that how the executives at Fox, I think it was, they were like, "This is like way too long. Nobody's gonna like it." And I think Jim fought for that, and that sequence turned out to be the most liked by the audience. It was
wow.
long, but it never felt long. Do
Yeah.
you were you sort of part of that sequence in any way? If so, at what capacity? I would love to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I should talk about, so my role, um, I I technically was an employee of Weta. So the guy who runs Weta, Joe Lettieri, he's a longtime friend and peer of mine. We worked at ILM together. We worked on Terminator 2 together and so forth. And then he went down, I think, for the second rings, and um never came back. I mean, he went down to Wellington, New Zealand, and just, why would you really? I mean, it's
Of
like
course,
just,
Jim is
so
down there too.
yeah, now Jim is down there. So I had continued to work with him, and when Avatar came up, he asked if I could be, essentially the Weta representative at Lightstorm. So the Lightstorm's Jim's production
Yep,
company, and they were the
yep.
ones doing the whole virtual production shoot. And so I was basically the guy there embedded, sitting with Jim every day on the mocap stage, you know, working with him. And there was another guy who worked for Lightstorm, Richie Bainham, who was also there, and he was also the sort of the creative, the animation creative, if you would. So Weta had its animation supervisor, Annie Jones, and Richie was the Lightstorm representative. So making sure that we're preserving and protecting the actors' performances and all the creatures that came up that needed animate specific creature animation, um, the banshees and the thanators and so forth. They Richie was in charge of that, so I stuck with Jim on all the performance capture, and then
Mm.
so a we did that for a year, and then so that was all of 2007, and then in 2008 at some point we went down to Wellington to shoot the live action part, so with the physical
Right.
actors, so it was,
Yep.
Sigourney and Sam and so forth, doing when they were humans. um that was 6 months in Wellington, and then we came back for another 6 months to the live to the virtual production stage, to do more performance capture. And so that was basically the 2 years of making. And then the final year, I went down 2009. I went down for the final year, back down to Wellington, and It was funny. I walked in my office and there was like dust everywhere. All my nothing had touched. I'd been gone for 2 years, literally. And we had Joe had divided. He was the lead creative on the show. So he had divided the show up into 5 groups. So I had my team essentially, and set of sequences, and I would guide them through. And there were like 4 other teams that were supervisors that were guiding it through. So um, that's how it was essentially structured. Um, in terms of, specifically like the floating mountain scene with the banshees and so forth. That was, yeah, I mean, I was there with, through everything, basically, all the capture for that. So that was, much like a live action shoot, but with stunts. We built, except we didn't have to build the real thing. We build these proxy mountains, these mountain faces,
Yeah.
which were like, essentially like rock climbing walls, and the actors could climb up these rock climbing walls, and we were capturing them as they're climbing. So they were really climbing. It was really good way to do it. And then they'd get up to the rookery, the Banshee rookery, and um, you know, Sam, who played Jake, he went after his Banshee, and then he would wrestle with that, and that would be a stunt man essentially that he was wrestling with, um, and you know, trying to connect his line to the Banshee. So yeah, I think you could see for our purposes, it was not only great action, but it was an opportunity to show off the beauty of the environments. I mean,
Yeah.
those that the floating mountains were spectacular, and the waterfalls that just dropped to infinity, and and then flying. It's just, it's classic fantasy storytelling, right? And so
Yeah.
I think people
I
ate that up.
I think those mountains were inspired by there are some mountains in China that's similar, obviously not floating in the air, but
Yep.
similar kind of design. I think they got inspired from that.
That's very
Um,
true. We actually sent one of our art directors to these mountains. There's 2 different ones, very similar look. And he went and was in heaven, took tons and tons of pictures, and so we followed the look of that. Obviously, there's no bottom to them, so they
yeah,
were
yeah,
floating. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, it's a beautiful film, man. Like even, you know, I showed to my kids the first one before we went to see the second one, and now I can't wait for the third one. You know, the three elements, earth, water, and fire,
Yeah.
and it's just to be able to. I even remember when before the second one came out, everybody's like, "How is this film going to work? It's been 13 years or so since the first one came out. Do people even remember?" And lo and behold, it made another what, $2 billion. Um, to you, I mean, again, to me, it's story, but what is it about? Is it Jim's fan base plus the motion capture plus the story that these stories? Listen, I'm going to be very honest. Like Jim's dialogues are not, thought provoking in a sense of like English poetry or anything English literature, but they're something that people relate to at a very, very personal level. And
He
maybe I
knows.
think, sorry, go on.
Yeah. He knows how to tell a story, plain and simple.
Yeah,
He's a superb storyteller. It is the fundamental thing that is lacking in most cinema events, right? They're just, you know, whether it's TV or movies or some live event, there always has to be a story there that it resonates with. That's how we communicate, right? And he's quite skilled at that. I think he also knows how to choreograph action very well, keep it interesting. He knows when to choreograph
cut.
the action
Yeah,
too. It's not just, the gratuitous superhero movie. Um, and then one other thing which has come up, I think, in the past, but couldn't be said enough. He always has a strong female character.
yeah,
And I think that is that's intentional, and I think it brings in a larger fan base as a result. Too many of the action movies these days are you know aimed towards a male demographic, and um, he he knows he needs to appeal to the whole audience, and so I think he's very skilled at doing that.
And I think what that also does is, to your point, is that when you have a female character that's there, as a main character or somewhat of a main character, it plays the opposite to a male character, right? And then there's that chemistry and there's that connection. And I think people appreciate that because that relatability, I mean, who cannot relate to that?
Yep.
Right? Like,
Yep.
I think to me, aside from that, that is very important. I mean, I think he does that because I think I read that he had a great relationship with his mom, if my memory serves me right.
Yeah.
And but that chemistry and that opposition, that disagreement or agreement, I think that really resonates with people. Obviously, it has to be done properly, which is how he does it, and it's fabulous to see.
I think so. I think, to summarize, I think he has tremendous creative instinct, but he also, to be fair, he does his homework, not like unlike a lot of directors out there, he does a lot of homework, and he in just embeds into the story. He gets into it to the point where he's passionate. He wants everybody else to be passionate. I mean, I would say that the biggest thing about Jim, and people, you hear stories about, is he a difficult guy? My experience was exactly the opposite. He's incredibly generous and sweet man. He As long as you pay attention and you're trying to keep up with him, there's no way. I mean, he's 3 steps ahead of you on any conversation. He's very, very smart. Um, but he sees whether or not you're engaged. And if you're not engaged, he'll call you out on it. So he goes in with this passion, this drive. He's like, I put my soul into this project. I want I need your help with it. And I expect you to come along and help me. And if you don't keep up, he'll call you on it. So I didn't have that experience. I recognized that right from the beginning. He's like,
Yeah.
just stay with me and things will be great. And I found him to be a wonderful person to work with. And I'd work with him again anytime. I was sad that I couldn't work on the second one. Actually, my wife had some health problems, so I couldn't, it
Mm.
wasn't, the timing wasn't right. So, um, but those guys, they're doing a great job, those guys.
Yeah. No, and to your point about, the rumors about James Cameron being this and that, I think just like at any company, any job, if you're not doing the job you're supposed to do, you're going to be called out on it. And people take that as a sign of bullying, but it's really not because you're getting paid to be there.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing your job, then you shouldn't be there, or at least or up it a bit. Like,
Yeah.
people, things happen with people. But yeah, I never pay attention to that stuff. I mean, there's stuff said about everybody that's X, Y, Z is like this. Nobody knows what the deeper stories are and the inner intricacies and everything. Um, but yeah, are you looking for the next Avatar? I'm sure you are. What
I
did you
am.
think of the second one?
I thought it was really good. To me, to your comment a moment ago, too much time went by, and I think that you had that was to me the most noticeable thing. There was sort of a momentum loss, if you would,
Mm,
and I think there was, it's kind of like, I mean, for me, I grew up in the Star Wars age, and so it was,
yeah,
you're just, you can't, you got it, you can't wait for the next edition to come out. Like, same with the Harry Potter books. It's like you can't, if 13 years was just too long. I mean, he had his other things he wanted to do. He went off and dove the Marianas Trench, and
yeah,
I remember him showing me the design on that sub, and I thought he was crazy, but it was, it's just he had these other ambitions. So, um, anyway, I think, yeah. So that to me was the momentum thing. Is like, I started watching a show, or Severance,
yeah.
yesterday,
The
and
Apple TV one,
it's
yeah,
like it's been years, and I'm like, and they were showing the preview, and I'm like, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Wait, and you're trying to remember some of the stuff, and it's, even though you get the previously on Severance, you
yeah,
kind of lose that. I was into it. And so I think it was the same with Avatar. It's like, even though I worked on it, I felt like there was just a loss of momentum. So, you know, 15 minutes later, you're into it and you're like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I get this and so forth. But what did you think?
Oh, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I thought especially for me, obviously as a family story, that was the core of it. But that technology they had, where they had um, the the young kid, again, I forget the character's name or the actor's name, who was integrated into the world. I
Mm,
mean, it was just so seamless. I was trying. I saw it two times in theaters. For the first time, I was trying to find problems. I'm like, where can you see something is? I just couldn't find it. It was just done so brilliantly that
yeah.
there was absolutely no flaw in the tech side of things. But I love the story. The whole family story. I mean, again, it's been done so many times before, but just the way he does it, it's different.
Yeah.
And I can't wait for the third one. And these are great stories, and I'm glad that he's gonna. I think he said it that he's not gonna direct the fourth or fifth one.
Mm.
He wants to do something more smaller and personal. But I think for me, the third one should be the end of it and not go beyond. But hey, I'm not the one running 20th Century Fox or Lightstorm, so not my not my
Disney
decision.
now. It's Disney now.
Disney, that's right. It's Disney
Yeah.
now. That's right. I forgot. I
Um,
forgot.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, we'll have to see what he does on the third one. I actually don't know anything about it. I know people are working on it, but I'm now entirely removed but from it. So which is kind of sad for me, but at the same time it's exciting because I get surprised. Um,
Yeah.
but
100%. I think a trailer should come out anytime soon. I mean, we're just what 7, 8 months away, so I'm sure we'll see a teaser in the next month or two, at
yeah,
least when the summer kicks off. So excited about that. Awesome, man. This has been great as usual. I mean, we can talk about this for hours and hours, but maybe another time. But it's been informative. I learned something new, and just the way you articulate everything, it's just so nice to hear from you and also for me as well as our viewers. So I really appreciate it.
happy to do it. Happy to do it. Glad we got the opportunity.
Awesome. Let's stay in touch, man.
Okay, take care.
All right, Steven. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.